Hi guys, my name is Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we're going to paint this nice little scene of a boatist or boat guy, whatever the term is. To me he looks like a gardener, maybe dredging out the pond there, I don't know. But this is another one from Monet's gardens that my in-laws took while they were in France. And I was just stricken by the composition. I just think it's kind of classical and elegant. So, I mean, if this guy's watching it, you made it into a painting. So anyways, let's do this. Here are the materials for today. Go ahead and pause and screenshot rather than listening to me rabbit on about it. I'm going to start out by masking this figure because I really don't want to have to paint around all of that. It's very tedious. So I dip my brush into a mixture of liquid dish soap and water, and then I dip it into the masking fluid. Then let it dry for at least 30 minutes. I'm going to start out my mixing today by mixing various different concentrations of lemon yellow and phthalo blue, and then graying most of them down with an alizarin crimson, except for this very, very yellowy mix right here, and that is just phthalo blue and lemon yellow. And really all I'm going for is just several different variations of the color. Like one of them will be a little bit more blue, one of them will be a little bit more grayed down with the alizarin, etc. This last one is going to be quite a bit darker than the others and more gray. And that's going to be for all of this water. I'm going to start out in the far distance, and I'm starting with the most yellow color and I'm adding that in the highlight areas, and then I'm using one of the middle colors to paint around those areas and add in some of the darker bits. And then I'm going to use the darkest of the greens, which actually is my watercolor, to add some definition into the background area here with dark. All of this middle ground is very, very saturated in color and a lot of sunlight is hitting it, so I'm going to use that most yellow of the greens and add in most of the highlight areas. Come back in with the middle green and add a little bit of definition. I've painted around some areas for some white flowers here. That's what the white is in the foreground. And I've also left an area for some of that burgundy, those burgundy plants in the background. So we'll just let all this dry first before we add the burgundy. And then I use a palette knife to scrape into the wet paint, and that gives me more blades of grass. So I'm mixing the alizarin crimson permanent with a little bit of Carbazole Violet, and that's going to be for those interesting plants in the middle ground back here. So starting out with the lighter color, then I add in some more of the Carbazole Violet to that and add it for a shadow color towards the bottom of the plants. Okay, I've allowed all of that to dry, and now we're starting on this enormous area of water, which is probably a good at least 75% of this painting. But I'm starting at the top, and I am actually using quite a dry mixture on my brush, and I'm skipping it across the surface of the paper using kind of a dry brush technique. I've added a little bit of that bright green in there as well so that you can kind of see the color of the lily pads. Most of them are washed out as white and you can't see much color, but some of them do have little traces of green. Since this is such a huge area of color and I don't really want it to turn out patchy, I'm actually using the white lily pads as kind of a separation. So I'll paint a section, I'll skip an area, let that be white lily pads, and then I'll go down beyond that. And using also the figure as a separation on that side, because right now you can see that I'm doing the left side of him. In a minute I'll be doing the right side of him after I skip down a little bit underneath the white, and that allows me to paint this a lot slower than I would have to if I was trying to do it all at once. And right here I added in a little bit of that medium green so that it can reflect into the water. You can't really see it on camera, but it is there. It's very subtle. And here I'm adding in a little bit of separation between the lily pads so that you can tell that that's what these are. And then I'm adding in just a little bit of that bright green so that you can catch a hint of the color that isn't washed out by the sun. Now I'm going to skip a little patch of white here and then come down and do the side on the right with all of this. Then I skip down to this large patch of white and I add in the reflection of the net, the reflection of the boat, and the reflection of the man. Now you can't really see it on here, but I do add in a little bit of cerulean blue right under the boat so that you can see its reflection in the water. I've come back in with one of my darker greens and I'm adding just a little bit of definition to some of this background here. You've got like a weeping willow right here in this light patch. You've got the shadows that need to happen underneath the bushes. That kind of stuff is just what I'm adding in right now. And then I just splatter it for a little bit of texture here. Time to remove the masking fluid, so I use a rubber cement eraser for that. It is fantastic for that job. Gets it off really easily. At least on a good 100% cotton paper it does. I'm working on the color for the boat and it's kind of a really odd color. So I'm using Hooker's Green and then Alizarin Crimson to gray that down a little bit, and then I'm adding in a little bit of French Ultramarine because it is a very kind of like bluish kind of teal color almost. I've watered that color down quite a bit and I'm just giving it a nice flat wash, and then towards the bottom I'll come back in with a higher concentrated version of that color for some shadow, and then fill in the interior of it with a little bit of a darker color and just add the details from there. A little bit of burnt umber and Payne's gray on the net pole here. Net pole? Why does that remind me of tadpole? Anyway. Now we have this cluster of vegetation in the corner. I'm starting out with the lime green and then I'm going to come back in with one of the darker greens. And I'm not going to go crazy with a lot of detail here. I probably should because it's closest to the camera, but if I put a ton of detail there, then it's going to draw the eye to it. And I want the eye to be on the figure. So I'm kind of ignoring a little bit of the detail there. And then I'm using Alizarin Crimson Permanent and mixed with a little bit of Carbazole Violet for this great big bucket. This guy looks like a little bit of a strawberry blonde, so I'm using some raw sienna towards the top of his head, making sure to leave some white there as well for the highlights. And then I'm using a mixture of burnt umber and Payne's gray towards the bottom, towards the nape of the neck. For his shirt, I'm mixing mostly Payne's gray with a little bit of burnt umber to warm it up a little bit, and then water it down and test the color. So here I'm kind of just painting in the medium values here. We'll deal with the shadows later, and then I'm just basically painting around the highlights. Anything that is a highlight, I'm leaving it white. For his pants, I'm mixing French Ultramarine Blue with Cadmium Orange. So for now, we're just painting in a light value and then just adding a little bit darker in some areas, and then we'll come back and do the detail after that's dried. And so here we go with the skin tone, which I know is a mystery for a lot of people. This is by no means an end-all be-all mixture because everybody's skin tone is different, but for this guy, he looks pretty pinkish. So I'm starting out with a quinacridone magenta, and then I'm adding quite a bit of yellow ochre, and then just a little bit of burnt umber. Then I water that down and test it out, and I think I think that'll do it. So I'm just going to take that color, and it's quite a watery consistency of it, and I'm just going to add this on all the skin tone areas. For right now, fairly flat, except for kind of on the highlights of the fingers. And I'm going to leave those white for now. Now into that skin tone, I am adding quite a bit of French Ultramarine, and this is going to be the shadow color for it. Skin tone often has quite a bit of blue in it to start with, because if you look at like your arm or something, you can see the veins underneath, and that kind of gives a little bit of a bluish tone sometimes to skin. Just don't go overboard. You don't want to smurf on your hands. Now we're going to use this color for the shadows. So most of this arm is in shadow except for a little sliver on the right there. And then pretty much all of his face is, and most of his neck. And also on the underside of all of these fingers here. So quite a lot of shadow here. I'm using some raw sienna for the boots here. I will come back in and add more detail later. Towards the bottom, I'm adding a little bit of burnt umber. Okay, there's a bit more of kind of like a sparkling texture to the top of this water than I got in there. So I'm taking an X-acto knife and I'm going to scrape it along the surface of the paper and scrape off the top layer of the paint. It adds a really nice kind of sparkling texture to water and to lots of other things. And I'm just going to add a little bit of detail in here with the lily pads as well. But basically you want to make sure that you're not pressing too hard because you don't want to cut through your paper. That will be a bad day. I've used this technique in another video. If you'd like to see that video, click the link above. In the top right hand of the corner in the very back, you can actually see Monet's famous bridge, which has a very distinctive kind of bright green color. So for that, I'm using phthalo green and I'm watering it down, and I'm just adding that in there for now. We'll come back with some shadow a little bit later. Using just a little bit of burnt umber watered down for some details on the boots. Back to the face, and I'm going to show you this one in real time so that you can kind of see that I'm really not just racing through this. You got to make sure that you get the detail that you want. So I'm starting on his nose, and then I'm leaving a little bit of a gap there, and I'm darkening up the shadow side of his face. And then we get the interior of the ear and a little bit of a shadow on the side of his neck as well. A little bit darker on the inner elbow here and right underneath his shirt. And then I'm going to come down and start working on a little bit of the shadow on the fingers. Hands can be extremely difficult to paint or to draw. And if you get them wrong, they can look extremely weird or extremely awkward. But these are so tiny and they are such a small area of this painting that I think that we can pretty much get away with not putting a ton of detail in. Basically, I'm just going for the overall sense of shadow and light on this, and I'm not worried about the positioning of each little finger. I'm just going for a general sense of the light in the area, and that should get the point across. Just adding some deeper shadow here in the interior of his ear and on the side of his head. I'm using burnt umber and Payne's gray mix there to make this area a little darker. And I'm just continuing to model his face a little bit with some of the shadow skin tone. Now I'm using my Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber mix, and I'm adding in some deeper shadows in the shirt area. Just adding in the definition of all of these folds in the fabric. And then using a nice dark Payne's Gray to add in the deepest areas of the shadows on the folds. Now I'm just adding in some definition to all these items on the boat, and on the boat itself I'm really just using deeper concentrations of the colors that I've used before. We're going to add some more modeling to the pants here to make his legs more rounded. Of course, they're a bit flat now. So I'm using a darker concentration of my French Ultramarine and Cadmium Orange, and I'm adding in the shadow and just basically modeling the roundness here, and make sure that I'm painting around all the wrinkles in the jeans. Well, this needs to be darker, so I am mixed up a darker consistency of my color, and I am just adding that in. His face still yet needs a little bit more definition, so the darkest darks and the shadows here is on the interior of his ear, so I'm adding that in and making it as dark as I dare, and doing the same on the nose. And then I will add a little bit darker on the bottom of his chin and up towards the temple as well. Oops, a little too dark. Let's dab it out. So here I'm using just a tiny little bit of Payne's Gray to add in the eye and the eyelash. I mean, you're not seeing much of the eyelash, but it is there. And adding in just a hint of his mouth there as well. On his boots, I'm reinforcing the raw sienna at the top, and then I am adding in some more burnt umber details. Also, I'm using a little bit of Payne's Gray to add in the shadow of where he's standing there, because otherwise it's looking like he's standing in the air, you know what I mean? So I added a little bit of Payne's Gray and then used some water to spread that out. And then used some Payne's Gray to add a little bit of shadow to Monet's bridge here in the back. Now I'm using some white gouache straight out of the tube to add in some highlights to the top of the head, to the bridge, and to the net, and other areas as I might see it. Actually, I add some as well to his shirt and a little bit to the wrinkles on his pants, just little tidbits here and there. And here's the finished product with the tape removed, and it's all dry and all that kind of stuff. And I really must say, I do love to paint the human form. I really should do more of it on this channel. My background really is a whole lot of portrait painting, and I do love to do that. But I mean, it is quite time consuming. I did take, I think, probably 3.5 hours to paint this, and that's just painting time. That does not include drying time. So if you want to attempt this, you will be in for a long haul, just so you know. I do want to mention real quick, I don't know if you can see it, but I did alter the size of his nose from earlier because it was a little too big. I actually came back in with my X-acto knife and scratched some of the watercolor off and made it a little bit white there and just took off the size of his nose. Just some forced rhinoplasty, you know. And there you have it, a nice classical looking painting from Monet's Gardens. And if you're this gardener, sorry for doing a painting of you on the sly, but it looked cool. So anyways, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff, because that's how this channel gets to grow. Thanks for watching. I will see you again in 2 weeks.